everyone, it's Alice and welcome to my rant review / wrap up of the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series with a particular focus on book 3, As Good as Dead. So because this is a rant review, I am going to get spoilery as heck. So if you haven't read As Good as Dead yet, leave my channel. I don't want to ruin it for you because I am about to get very in-depth and detailed, particularly about the end of the book. And this one is a chunker. This one has quite a lot of twists and turns in it. So leave. Thank you for coming, but you're not welcome here. And if you haven't read books 1 and 2, tread with caution, because obviously I'm about to ruin the end of the series for you. If you're not that interested in them and you don't mind about spoilers, that's fine. But I don't know, I might get spoilery about these. I can't think of why I wouldn't get spoilery about this one, because of how I don't know. There's just going to be spoilers galore, let's be honest. But particularly talking about As Good as Dead. So, in case you haven't heard of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder and you're a glutton for punishment and just want the spoilers anyway, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder follows Pip Fitzmaurice. She is starting her extended project qualification in sixth form and she decides to reopen a closed case in her hometown because the guy who was found guilty of murder, he sadly died by suicide while the investigation was ongoing, so they took that as an admission of his guilt. But Pip was friends with him, or friends with someone who was close friends with him. She kind of knew him by association, and she never thought that Selsing was the real culprit. So Pip decides to reopen the case and reinvestigate it, and she starts getting threatening letters and blackmailed throughout the story. So it's pretty clear that the person who was found guilty, because they are dead, was not the culprit. And then in the second book, Good Girl, Bad Blood, Pip further investigates this. So basically all the fallout of this first book, where it's told in extended project logs in the first book, it's told in podcast transcripts in the second book. So she starts her own podcast called A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. She shares how she solved this case. And other shit goes down. There's like another case on in the background because one of her best friend's brothers goes missing. So she uses her podcast to find Jamie Reynolds, and other stuff goes on. It gets very sad towards the end. It's very dramatic. 5 stars, 4 stars so far. Good. Yeah, but at the end of book 2, as I said, dramatic shit has gone down, and Pip in the start of book 3 is seriously struggling with PTSD. There's lots of repetitive what's it called? Motifs of like gunshots. So if she hears like a bang, it turns into 6 gunshots in her head because that's how many times she's seen somebody get shot. Whenever she is sweaty or nervous or anything, she feels like she's got blood on her hands, and it's like she can feel the blood all over her hands again. And she can feel like the cracking of the ribs as well. And that repetitive motif is absolutely amazing because it really does show the way that PTSD can affect people in different ways. Because the person who disappeared in book 2, he is obviously also struggling with the events that occurred, but he is struggling in a different way, and you don't see much of him, and I wish that had been further explored. It would have been nice to see more from Jamie Reynolds in this book, because I feel like there was a lot of potential there for him and Pip to kind of bond over the experiences that they'd shared, but there is like that kind of look at PTSD and anxiety and grief and struggling with something bad that has happened, and I loved that. But while Pip is struggling, she is also dealing with the fact that she is getting these letters, emails and tweets sent through to her podcast page, saying, "Who will look for you when you disappear?" Oh, who will look for you when you're the one who disappears? It's quite threatening. All of a sudden there are dead pigeons on her driveway. There are these little creepy chalk figures like crawling up her driveway towards her house, and she's like, shit's going down. I'm not sure what's going on, but I don't like it. And she thinks she's being stalked. She goes to the police. They're like, nah, you're just imagining it. It was probably like markings from car tires, and it's probably just a cat randomly decapitating pigeons and leaving them in the exact same spot on your driveway every day, because that's what cats do. So Pip decides to investigate and to work out who is stalking her because she believes it might be somebody called the duct tape killer. Now this is a serial killer who has been found guilty. He admitted to his crimes, has been in prison for a very long time, and all of a sudden this is happening, and it matches some of the motives that he had. And his mum's actually been in touch with Pip and been like, hey, I think my son's innocent. Can you investigate his case for me? So Pip's like, yeah, you know what? I'll investigate his case because it might help me. And once I've saved myself, like if I solve this case, it might help me save myself. And so it's like save herself to save herself. It's another very like repetitive idea throughout this. It's like, you can't have that freedom until you have saved yourself from the demons of your past. So that's really cool as well. But this is where it's about to start getting ranty. Hang on, let me finish with the good points first. We'll start this off really positively because I did have good things to say about this. As you can tell, I'm already very impressed by the PTSD aspects, and I did enjoy some of the things that were investigated. I liked the idea of linking it to this cold case as well. This closed case that's like completely out of left field. Like a really huge serial killer case that Pip, like basically every single podcast ever has investigated. Pip's like, oh, actually, I might have like a different perspective on it. That was really cool. But there were things that annoyed me as well. But we'll carry on with the good things for now. So another thing that I really appreciated in this one was the kind of discussion of binary oppositions of good and bad. Whether good people can ever have any evil in them or whether evil people can ever have any good. Kind of once bad, always bad is discussed in this a lot. This is where it starts getting horrendously spoilery. So basically, the guy who ends up being the stalker, they find out not only is he the duct tape killer, he was also a rapist in his very distant history. And if you've read the other books, you'll know that there is a guy called Max Hastings who Pip discovers has been like a serial rapist around Little Kilton, and he is up on trial for it in book 2, and he gets away with it. They find him not guilty. Pip's fueled with rage about this because he literally admitted it to her, and they said that it was like a coerced, fabricated confession. So she like released the audio files and everything and was like, look, I don't care what the jury says, he did it. And I liked the way that was kind of linked of like, okay, so the guy who ended up being this horrendous serial killer used to be a serial rapist, and there's another serial rapist, so it's implied that he would have gone the same way. And it's like, can a leopard really change its spots? Like once you've started, especially like with violence against women, once you've started exhibiting those traits of violence against women, is that something you can ever rein in? Is that something that you can ever truly control and get past and kind of repent for? So I liked the discussion of that because it's a very moral argument and it's very philosophical of like, okay, can you do a bad thing for a good reason? Can you do a good thing for a bad reason? Like it's, yeah, like all the justifications in this book are very clever because there's some stuff that Pip does that I'll get into in the bad section, that it's a bit morally grey, to say the least. I also love the fact that this is basically 2 stories told in one. So if you can see, there's a big old part 2 smacked in the middle here. So the first half of the book is Pip being stalked and trying to work out who is stalking her. The second half of the book occurs after Pip brutally murders her stalker. Did not see that coming. And it's how she gets away with the murder. So it literally becomes a good girl's guide to murder. Like, the second half of this is just wild. It was not what I was expecting at all, and I loved it. I was dreading the fact that it was going to be, like, very slow and dreary. Like, okay, I've been kidnapped, now I've got to try and get free. My family is searching for me. Who is looking for me now that I've disappeared? Possibly, like, dual perspective of them looking for her and her trying to escape. I got to the halfway point. I was like, I just can't see how this is going to stay interesting, and I didn't think that it was going to grab my attention. But the second half was a breeze. Really, really flew through it, actually. It is a little bit repetitive because, obviously, it's like her and Ravi are kind of plotting how she can get away with this crime. And they come up with a plan, and then they enact the plan. And then they're, like, reminiscing almost on how the plan has worked and making sure that they've got everything in place and making sure that everything has gone smoothly. So there are a few repetitive aspects that do slow the plot down a bit. But I thought it was such a clever idea, instead of doing it as like a 4-book series, just to take this really chunky, thick boy, which is like 100 pages longer than the second one, I think. Wait, this is the first one. Let's see. The first one is 433. And the second one is 413. I didn't know the first one was a longer one. That's interesting. But the third one is 549 pages. So this is over 120 pages longer. You can see why they had to do like a dramatic kind of split down the middle. However, I do kind of wish it had been 4 books, because I do think that there are aspects of this that are rushed, considering it's at the same time a little bit slow. There are aspects that are rushed, but again, that's something that I'm going to go into when I get to the bad points, because that is something I am going to rant about. I also absolutely love Ravi and Pip's relationship through basically this entire thing. Ravi and Pip are endgame, and they are my baes, and I love them, and I ship them so hard, and I have since book 1, so I was happy with the amount of Ravi and Pip that we got. It did mean that the rest of the cast kind of fell into the background though. So instead of getting to see Pip with Cara, Pip with Connor, like her and her friends around her, it was very intensely focused on Pip and Ravi. And I liked that, but I also felt a little bit sad because I loved the other characters as well, and we've gotten to know those other characters so well in the first 2 books that I wanted to see more of them, knowing that this is the last book in the series. Last time we're visiting Little Kilton and last time we're seeing these characters, I wanted to get more of a goodbye with all of them. And the other bits that I absolutely loved about this were the, like, with the blood on the hands. Sean actually pointed this out. I had not picked up on it at all, but it's very much like Lady Macbeth, with like that out-damned spot. So that was a really cool, like, Shakespearean iconography inclusion. I don't know how to say that, but you know what I mean. Like, it was a Shakespearean thing. It looked pretty cool. There's also a scene in McDonald's just after she's killed the guy, when somebody knocks a chair over, and she thinks she's gonna hear the crunch of the hammer hitting the skull, but she still just hears the gunshots that she's been hearing, that like repetitive motif of the gunshots. And I loved that, because it showed that Pip really did feel no remorse for what she'd done. She felt as though the course of action that she'd taken was the right one, and that there was no reason for her to regret it, and she wasn't experiencing any kind of PTSD over those events, because they were events that she could control, and they were events that she felt played out as they should have. So I liked the fact that that was still very much in character, of like, okay, so she was still more torn up about Stanley's death than over the fact that she just brutally murdered somebody. Like, okay. And I also really loved, there's a scene right at the very, very end, when Max Hastings has been arrested, because they managed to frame him for murder, which is just like badass. And he gets arrested and he like flips out and he goes for her, and she's like, "You're lucky I didn't kill you too." She like hisses at him outside the police station, and it's like, oh my god, I love scenes like that when the bad guy says the bad thing in front of like the good guys, but they can't hear it, and it's like, oh shit, you just admitted it, and if only they'd like been a little bit smarter or a little bit closer, they would have heard you. That's just like, I don't even know if it's a trope because it doesn't seem to happen very frequently, but every time it happens it just brings me such joy. So I was so happy with that tiny little inclusion as well. There were a few things I was feeling a little bit mixed over. One of those being the slow pacing. I could have put this in like the bad section, but it's just personal preference, isn't it? I like fast-paced YA thrillers, so I would have preferred this to have been a bit shorter or a bit faster. Some people love slow-burning mysteries, but I was getting a little bit restless with it. Sean also found it as like part of the mixed bag was the fact that instead of being like a crime book, this was more of a thriller. The first 2 are very much focused on crimes. You've got focus on a murder, you've got focus on a kidnapping. But in this one, where there's a lot about the stalking, and it's a lot of that kind of domestic thriller, discomfort in your own home, and not feeling safe in your local area, and feeling very unsettled by the things around you. It feels a lot more like a YA thriller than a YA murder mystery. And it sounds like there's not much like difference between them, but there is. And we'd very much gone into this expecting like a crime book, so that was a little bit sad because it had like a completely different like tonal shift. The first 2 books were written at the same time. As far as I'm aware, they were written at the same time. They were going to be like one big book, and then it got split. So Holly Jackson weaved some of the foreshadowing for book 2 into book 1 and kind of jigged things like the timeline around slightly. But it was all written at the same time, and this one was written afterwards, and you can get that dramatic tonal shift because this one does feel very different. It still feels like a Good Girl's Guide to Murder novel. It just doesn't feel as kind of quaint and not even really quaint. I don't know, kind of quaint. I think it's because it's the tiny little village setting, but it doesn't have that same atmosphere. It feels a lot bigger, if that's any way to describe that. I also found it kind of mixed that it was like that philosophical discussion of like bad people can't get better, because Pip murders somebody. She can justify it because of who he was, but if she's murdered somebody once, does this mean she's now going to go on like vigilante crime sprees when she's older, and she's just going to be killing culprits that don't get taken down by the traditional justice system? Because it's implied, because they're saying bad people can't get better, and she has just done a bad thing, so she might be a bad person. And I just think that all of the morally grey and all of the ambiguity, Pip's got a huge thing about having the black and white, but there's a very intense focus on the grey. And I both love that and hate that, which is why it's a bit mixed. Like, I kind of wish this had been a bit more like, okay, there are times when you can do a bad thing for a good reason, or, oh no, you can never do a bad thing for a good reason. Like, it's very, like, make up your own mind. And it would have just been nice to see how Pip felt about it, because it feels like it doesn't settle too strongly on something on purpose so that the reader can make up their mind. But it just would have been nice to see, like, this character who's always been like, okay, justice, 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 be like, this is a different kind of justice, but I think I'm still okay with it. And just, like, figuring out how she feels about it rather than just trying to get away with it, because she knows she wants to get away with it. She doesn't want to go to prison for the rest of her life. But you don't really get how she feels about what she's doing. I don't know. It would have slowed the plot down even more, but it would have been nice to have had a bit more of an emotional focus. And now we get to the bits that I'm a little bit pissed about. So let's start with the fact that Pip's little brother, like a few chapters in, he's like, somebody's watching our house. So Ravi makes a joke about somebody being a pervert, I think. And Josh is like, what's a pervert? And Ravi's like, oh, it's like somebody who's creepy. They'll like watch your house. They'll like follow you. They're really like weird. And Josh is like, oh, is that like that man who's outside? And obviously, as a reader, you then twig later on, like, oh, he must have been meaning Jason Bell, because Jason Bell is the DT killer who's stalking Pip. But there's no kind of moment of reveal when Josh sees like the BBC News and it's like Jason's face on the screen and he's like, that man was watching our house. Because it just feels like, why would you put that in? Especially because the first 2 books, the foreshadowing is impeccable because of the fact that they were, like, written at the same time. So it was, like, weaved through. So the foreshadowing, of course, was amazing. But it feels like that foreshadows really, really well of, like, Jason watching her and Josh being like, I saw him. Like, I know who, like, he's a bad man kind of thing. But it's never referred to again. And I kept thinking, like, oh, yeah, Josh is going to, like, save the day. Because there's this huge thing of, like, oh, Josh has got his nose in everything. Josh is really nosy. Josh is, like, paying too much attention to everything now. But that doesn't lead to anything. And I don't know why, because that would have been really cool. There's also the fact that Pip, at the beginning of the book, is investigating a Jane Doe case. A murder that was completely unsolved. And she wants to solve this Jane Doe case, because she's like, there's got to be, like, a good and a bad in this situation. Like, this poor girl has been murdered. Nobody knows who she is. Nobody knows what's happened to her. So the person who has killed her is the bad person. So there's, again, that moral binary of, like, good and bad. The oppositions of, like, good and evil. But then, when it gets to the end and you're like, okay, well, Jason Bell was like a serial rapist when he was younger. Wouldn't it have been more interesting if Pip had been trying to solve this string of, like, unsolved rapes from the 80s and being like, right, okay, well, there's obviously a good and a bad here, because these are all, like, young women who have been sexually assaulted and there's somebody who's, like, the culprit who's never been caught. Like, that would be more interesting if it was foreshadowed of, like, she was investigating that case and then ended up solving that case inadvertently. I just thought it would be really clever. It would have probably been a bit too cliched because it would have been a bit too neatly wrapped up, but it just felt a bit frustrating to me of like, okay, so you're investing a lot of time and effort and energy and research into this Jane Doe case, which then just gets dropped because Pip's got the DT killer thing going on, and I'm like, it feels a bit directionless at times, which isn't great. Also, the case that the who will look for you when you're the one who disappears isn't as explored as much as it could have been. Like, I like the fact that she takes it and uses it as who will help me when I need to cover up a murder, because all the people who are on her list of, like, people who would help look for her if she disappeared, they're the ones that she goes to for help to cover up this murder. That's cool. Like, that's a really good way of doing it. But I think, like, if there had been, like, that time when Ravi's trying to contact Pip and he can't get her because Jason Bell's got her, and he, like, gets their friends together, and you get, like, a couple of chapters from Ravi's perspective with, like, that franticness of, like, oh my god, somebody's been stalking my girlfriend and now she's disappeared. She told me she was going to disappear. What do I do? Who do I get? How can I, like, make this better? I think it would have been interesting to see a dual perspective on that bit. I normally hate books that split into a dual perspective at the end, but where this one is third person instead of first person, I think it could have worked perfectly if you'd suddenly had, like, a couple of chapters from Ravi's perspective. Just got to see a bit more of the impact that Pip had on the world around her and the, like, people that she would have been leaving behind if she hadn't been able to get free. There's also the fact that the culprit from book 2, he escapes at the end of book 2. His name is Charlie Green. He kills the person that Pip keeps hearing the gunshots about, Stanley Forbes, and he goes on the run. So, for the first half of As Good As Dead, he hasn't been caught, and Pip is like, oh, I really wish I could, like, sit down and have a conversation with him and just, like, get his feelings on what he's done. So there is that idea of, like, Pip wanting to explore the feelings of what it's like when you do a bad thing for a good reason. And wanting to work out who that makes you as a person. And then he gets caught, and they're like, yeah, we found him in France. And Pip's like, can I speak to him? They're like, no. You're the only witness to the fact that he murdered somebody. You can't speak to him. And that's it. He's never mentioned again. It would have been great to see Pip go, like, undercover and somehow visit him and get that cathartic conversation of, like, right, okay, you killed somebody in front of me and I'm pissed about that, but I also just kind of, like, I can justify what you've done in my own head, and I want to see how you justify it and how you feel. That would have been a really cool conversation to see on the page, and I think it would have made the second book feel more complete, because I wanted Charlie Green to come back in some way, shape or form, because he was such an impactful character in the second book. And so for it to be like, he doesn't appear on the page again, he's just caught and then that's it, it's just done. Feels a bit cheap. There's also the fact that Pip basically just completely disregards the fact that there's somebody in prison who is suspected of being the DT killer. Like, she knows Jason Bell is the DT killer because he's just wrapped her up in duct tape and tied her to a shelving unit and tried to murder her. And so she's like, right, okay, well, I've killed him. I'm going to blame Max Hastings because he's a dirty rapist and I want him in prison, and the jury didn't find him guilty and I'm annoyed about that. But she just forgets about Billy, and it's like the first book, it's all about Pip wanting justice for the innocent who have been wrongly accused. Like, she just wants to clear Sal Singh's name. She doesn't really care about who killed Andy Bell. She just cares that it wasn't Sal Singh. And so it's the complete antithesis of her character. She's just done this 180 and it doesn't feel like Pip anymore. Like, she suddenly wants revenge more than justice, and that doesn't feel like Pip. I know that she's annoyed by the fact that the jury didn't find Max Hastings guilty, and I know that she's, like, hurting because of that, because of her friends who have been negatively impacted by this guy, but it doesn't feel like she would be so callous. Like, yeah, let an innocent guy rot in prison for a few more months. I just want to get this rapist put in prison for a crime he didn't commit that I'm going to frame him for. Okay. Like, I was kind of glad because towards the end of the book, it does still come out. Like, they still work out that Jason Bell was the DT killer because he kept trophies from his victims. So they're around the house and they find them and they're like, oh, that's a bit strange. Like, what's going on here then? He must be. So the DT killer, or the accused, Billy, he does still get to go home. He does still get to be freed. But I just think that that was, like, Pip's whole character in book 1, and for her to throw that to the side, it made me not really like her anymore, and I didn't think I would ever not like Pip, because Pip's great, and just seems to be completely misguided in this one. There's also nothing that comes out of the drama between Pip, Ant and Lauren. So Ant and Lauren were two of Pip's friends who she fell out with in book 2, had a big blowout with them. her and Ravi bump into them in the woods and they basically accuse her of being crazy. But then that's the last time they're seen and nothing really comes out of that either. And there was also a guy called Tom in book 2 who faked a statement to appear on her podcast because he wanted some social media standing, I suppose. And Pip empties a Diet Coke over his head and embarrasses him in front of the entire cafeteria. And I just thought that it would be really cool if he had something to do with the events of book 3 because it's like such a small thing, but it could really have a huge impact on people if you're someone who's like getting known all over the world because you're doing this true crime podcast and all of a sudden you're calling them out on it and embarrassing them. I wanted something to come out of that as well, but it felt like that wasn't really included for any reason. It feels like a lot of the little things that could have, like threads that could have weaved through, have been cut short in the attempt to make this into one book when it could have been split into 2 and those little threads could have popped up again and had a bit more of a neat conclusion. Again, I'm somebody who likes neat endings in books because it just annoys me otherwise. I'm like, why would you put those threads there that could be explored if you're not going to bother? But I know a lot of people like it when it's not neat because it does feel more realistic, because in real life, if you fall out with friends, you might never talk to them again. You might not ever have another reason to interact with them. I just think in fiction, it's more satisfying if those little events end up having a knock-on effect in the future, like the butterfly effect, rather than just getting dropped. And my last complaint, of which I feel like there haven't actually been that many. I feel like I was more annoyed about it when I was reading it, and I could have ranted for hours if I'd filmed this as soon as I finished it, but I decided to give it a couple of days. My last complaint is that it all just gets a bit overwrought towards the end. Like, literally, the chapter before the last chapter, Pip and Ravi break up, because she's like, look, you've just helped me cover up a murder, and I can't risk it getting back to you. So we're going to cut all contact, and then if anybody ever finds out, you can say that you were coerced, you can say that I bullied you into it, and then as soon as you did it, you cut all ties with me, you ended our relationship, we never saw each other again. The only way we can ever talk again is if Max Hastings is found guilty and our ruse has worked. So she leaves Ravi crying on his knees in the forest, and it's heart-wrenching and it's horrible. And then there's a chapter of Pip in Cambridge where she's gone to university and she's feeling really sad because she's missing Ravi and she can't contact Ravi and she's ignoring her parents because she doesn't want to get them dragged into it. And then the very last page is a text. 3 minutes after the verdict was read in The Crown versus Max Hastings, hey Sarge, remember me? So it's been like a year, 8 months and 16 days pass in this one page. And then the trial's over and he's obviously been found guilty because Ravi's suddenly got in contact. And it's like, okay, so we just had to see them break up for like 10 pages. Big, overwrought, over-dramatised breakup scene that we're meant to really, really care about. And then it's like, no, we're back together. You don't know that they're back together because obviously it is left open-ended, but it's pretty apparent that like if he's waited a year and a half to be like, sup, she'll be like, sup. And it just annoyed me a bit. Like, leave Pip and Ravi alone. They've been through so much. You don't need to break them up 2 chapters before the end just to be like, they might get back together, they might not. Like, I know a lot of teen relationships don't last, but a lot of teen relationships don't involve covering up murders for each other or, like, finding your dead brother innocent of a crime he didn't commit. Like, that's a pretty serious teen relationship, you know? And it just kind of cheapened the impact of the whole thing for me. It was just like, oh, like all of this happened just so Pip and Ravi could break up and then get back together. Okay, sure. Why not? And notes that I didn't write down. Cara gets shafted. Literally, Pip's like, I'm with Ravi. And Cara's like, well, I've got a girlfriend called Steph. And she's barely in it at all. That's annoying to me. Connor, lovely, bubbly, energetic, like, puppy dog on a page, Connor, just literally appears like twice. And I just wanted to see more from the characters that I really loved. And it made me a little bit sad because I thought this was going to be an amazing series ender. Like, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder is one of my favourite books. Like, I've read this one. I think I read this one in a day. I've read Good Girl, Bad Blood twice. And I liked it more the second time than I did the first time, which is surprising for YA crime because I don't normally feel like I like them more the second time around. but this one was on the YA Book Prize shortlist, so I had to reread it when I read the shortlist for my vlog. If this one goes on the shortlist, she's getting reread in February, so that'll be fun. But yes, I loved the first two. Yes, I didn't love the second one as much as the first one, but that's fair. But I thought this, especially when it was like so chunky, I thought this was going to be a new favourite. I thought it was going to be a great series ender, but I'm giving it 3 stars. I was conflicted until I started filming this, and then I was like, no, it's a 3-star. That's what the problem is. But as you can see, there's some good points, there's some bad points, there's some mixed points. I just wanted to kind of get my thoughts out about it. And if any of you have finished this and have read this, how did you feel about it? Did you think it was a great end to the series, or did you think it was a bit of a naff conclusion? Because part of me loves the fact that we got to see that side of Pip. We got to see her go dark and angry and evil, and I loved that. But it also felt more like fanfic than an actual, like, story following these characters, because it didn't feel like Pip at all, which was a bit sad. But at least I got the lovely sprayed page edition, so I can just have it on my shelf and feel a little disappointed by it forevermore. If you like this video, please like it, and if you'd like to subscribe, we'd be super duper grateful. As I said, if you've read this series and you'd like to share your thoughts on it, please leave those down in the comments. We post new videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, so we will see you again soon with another video. Bye!